Representative Ocasio-Cortez entered the committee chamber believing she would school the elderly politicians on liberal principles. Louisiana's Senator John Kennedy observed a former service worker holding a diploma in economics she barely grasped, prepared to support legislation with uncalculated expenses. The senator possessed only 5 minutes for his inquiry. The congresswoman lacked any substantial responses. The ensuing events would render her the most ridiculed legislator on Capitol Hill. The Budget Committee had invited her to speak regarding the Green New Deal, which was her flagship bill, vowing to overhaul the national economy and rescue the globe from environmental ruin. She consented to attend because she imagined congressional testimony would provide dignity, making her appear professional and weighty, rather than merely a social media influencer. Extensive time was dedicated to rehearsing arguments concerning global warming and societal fairness, alongside the ethical necessity for courageous moves. She possessed data regarding greenhouse gases and anecdotes concerning neighborhoods impacted by ecological decline. She felt prepared to motivate and confront while arguing that only drastic measures could preserve our tomorrow. However, she was entirely unprepared for Senator John Kennedy. The elderly Republican from Louisiana resembled a kindly patriarch wearing a creased outfit and speaking with a drawl, suggesting he had recently arrived from a swamp-side seafood cookout. Upon meeting those testifying, he customarily introduced himself as merely a humble attorney, attempting to comprehend the complex topics the intelligent visitors were discussing. He possessed a method of appearing benign and somewhat sluggish, as if he were straining to match the pace of urban intellectuals and their sophisticated concepts. Most attendees failed to realize until it was too late that Kennedy was actually a Rhodes Scholar who had completed studies at Oxford. He also held a legal doctorate from the University of Virginia. For many years prior to joining the government, he had practiced as an attorney. During that period, he mastered the technique of causing adversarial figures to ruin their own credibility using their specific phrasing. The persona of a rustic legal practitioner was a performance that worked incredibly well because opponents constantly undervalued his intellect until he had already ensnared them. Kennedy utilized the hours preceding the session, reviewing with his team every declaration Ocasio-Cortez had uttered regarding her environmental proposal, including every guarantee of employment and every allegation concerning expenses. They had assembled what the senator termed his roster of basic inquiries. These were straightforward and fundamental queries that any legitimate legislative suggestion ought to address without difficulty. He intended to ask how much the plan would cost, and the specific number of occupations it might generate, and exactly how funding would be secured. He also wondered where electrical power would originate if fossil fuel usage were completely terminated. These interrogations appeared almost too elementary to pose, which was precisely why they posed such a threat when the respondent lacked solutions. The representative possessed rehearsed arguments. She held deep emotion and a sense of moral certainty. She commanded millions of online fans who clung to her every utterance. However, she did not possess a financial ledger. She lacked a concrete strategy for execution that included verified statistics. She was missing the responses to elementary inquiries. Senator Kennedy was preparing to reveal that deficiency during the most courteous yet ruinous 5 minutes of her career in government. If one has ever been curious about the result, when a person appearing intelligent encounters a person who truly possesses intelligence, you will soon discover the answer. When Kennedy offered his grandfatherly grin and requested assistance in understanding the topic, the dynamic shifted. While the Congresswoman became progressively agitated and protective, the entire nation witnessed the distinction between Internet fame and genuine legislative expertise. The audience saw the gap between sounding liberal and being ready, and between a mixologist with an economics diploma and a Rhodes Scholar feigning ignorance. The committee chamber was packed with roughly 200 individuals, including aides and reporters and lobbyists and civilians, who secured tickets to witness what they assumed would be a standard session on ecological regulations. The space held that specific vibe of formal Capitol affairs, featuring timber walls and severe paintings of former leaders staring down from above. Cameras from C-SPAN were placed to record every detail, establishing an enduring archive that would remain accessible indefinitely. Ocasio-Cortez arrived and occupied her chair at the testimonial desk. At 34 years of age, she was dressed in business attire that succeeded in appearing both authoritative and stylish, which was her trademark look that rendered her a favorite of the press. She appeared self-assured and even enthusiastic. This represented her opportunity to advocate for her dream on a countrywide platform and demonstrate she belonged in these corridors of influence despite being disregarded by senior lawmakers as merely a youthful novice who lacked knowledge of how systems truly functioned. The session commenced with introductory remarks from the panel members, which was the standard theatrical display of parties stating their views before any real interrogation began. Democrats commended the witness for her courageous foresight and ethical lucidity regarding global warming. Republicans voiced doubt concerning the expenses and practicality of such a massive financial overhaul. The representative endured it all while appearing calm and nodding occasionally when her allies offered praise, while keeping her face blank when opponents were critical. Finally, the moment arrived for inquiries. The presiding officer acknowledged Senator Kennedy for his 5 minutes. Kennedy grinned kindly at the witness, while rearranging documents before him, taking his time to broadcast the persona of a gentle senior citizen who merely desired a cordial chat regarding legislation. He thanked Miss Ocasio-Cortez for her presence and expressed gratitude that she took time to speak before their group. His southern drawl was heavy and unhurried, with every syllable consuming time. He mentioned reading about her environmental proposal and confessed that it appeared incredibly bold. Changing the whole economy and renovating every structure in the nation while reaching zero emissions within a decade is a massive project. He beamed even more affectionately, as if he were truly dazzled by her imagination. He expressed hope that she could assist him because he was merely a humble attorney from the South, and some details were beyond his grasp, but he was attempting to comprehend the magnitude of the discussion. He asked for the total price tag, or just a rough estimate, so he could mentally process the concept. The query seemed harmless and nearly amiable, like an inquisitive politician seeking clarity. She ought to have identified the snare. The representative began her rehearsed lines regarding the impossibility of pricing planetary survival and how doing nothing would cost much more than any funding for her plan. She explained that this was actually a contribution to the national destiny rather than a bill to fear. Kennedy heard her out while nodding and keeping that grandfatherly look on his face. When she stopped speaking, he interjected with that identical soft voice. He stated that he valued those sentiments and agreed the climate issue was severe. However, he was posing a more elementary query if she did not object. He raised his palm and began tallying on his digits as if he were attempting to solve a simple arithmetic equation. He asked the price of the plan she had suggested. Since she asked them to review it, she surely possessed some notion of the figures involved. He asked her to help him comprehend. He inquired if it was 10 trillion or 20 trillion or 50 trillion and requested a rough estimate. The witness moved in her chair. This exchange was not proceeding as she had anticipated. She stated the expenses were not completely tallied yet because they remained in the suggestion stage. Various financial experts held differing predictions based on their specific premises regarding the details. Kennedy cut her off softly. He noted that she was proposing to overhaul the total national market, yet could not state the price. He asked if that summary was correct. She replied that the calculations differed broadly. He noted again that she lacked a specific figure. Kennedy kept his smile constant, but his tone adopted a slightly more cutting rim while staying entirely civil. He wanted to verify he understood clearly that she wished to renovate every structure and swap every automobile for an electric model, and alter power generation, and change farming while asking citizens to back this giant shift. Yet, when he requested the price she possessed, no response. He waited, allowing that fact to settle. The chamber became extremely silent. He mentioned that when he visits the supply shop in his home state to fix his residence, the staff immediately asks for his budget because renovation is impossible without knowing what one can pay. It appeared to him that this was a detail one should calculate before suggesting the largest financial shift in the nation's past. The representative's face turned red. She argued that with all respect, the environmental emergency required courageous moves. She insisted they could not allow worries about funding to stop them. Kennedy replied that he was not attempting to stop anything, while his voice remained soft but resolute. He claimed he was merely attempting to comprehend what they were being requested to endorse. He noted she was a legislator who held an economics diploma from Boston University. When she confirmed this, he stated she surely grasped that before spending funds, one must know the amount being spent. That is fundamental financial theory. However, she could not inform them. He expressed worry regarding that fact. It ought to worry every citizen viewing the proceedings. She was requesting support for the largest expenditure in human existence, and she was unaware of the price. The witness attempted to bounce back. She mentioned several research groups had analyzed this, and the costs relied on execution specifics, but those groups produced figures ranging from $50 trillion to $93 trillion over a decade. Kennedy spoke while dropping the pretense of ignorance slightly. He acknowledged those were their guesses. However, she had rejected those calculations as irrelevant. Therefore, he was asking her for the cost rather than what research groups claimed. He asked what she said the number was. The quiet that ensued was awkward. The representative lacked a response. Everyone present in the chamber and watching on television realized she did not have an answer. She possessed emotion and belief, but lacked figures. She held a dream, but not a strategy. Kennedy allowed the pause to linger a bit longer than required before proceeding to his subsequent inquiry, already aware he had won his initial significant victory. The basic query of cost revealed she did not know. She merely wished to disperse funds she had not tallied. Kennedy rearranged his documents, and his voice became even more amiable if that were achievable. He asked to inquire about a different topic recently in the headlines. He mentioned Amazon wished to construct their second base in New York City. They promised 25,000 positions. He heard they were lucrative positions as well. Yet she resisted the plan, and the company chose to go elsewhere. He asked if she could explain her reasoning on that matter. He stated he was trying to grasp the financial logic of rejecting 25,000 careers. The representative adjusted her posture, feeling she was on more solid territory. She explained Amazon requested nearly $3 billion in tax incentives and subsidies. That was $3 billion that could have been better utilized for their neighborhoods and education and systems that help everyone instead of a single firm. Kennedy nodded as if he understood her rationale. He clarified that she believed the tax incentives could be better utilized. He asked if that was her statement at the time, claiming the funds could be used elsewhere. She replied yes, precisely. He asked her to help him comprehend that point. Kennedy leaned in a bit while keeping his inquisitive grandfatherly manner. He noted that tax incentives occur when one does not gather taxes, one usually would. She was agreeing to forego collecting specific levies in return for some advantage. So that represents funds that could go to other causes. However, he asked if the company does not arrive, does she receive those funds to spend? The question from Kennedy was presented so softly, it took a second for the snare to become obvious. The witness paused. She started to say the city would not be gifting $3 billion that could be used for other needs. That was not his question, Kennedy stated, while continuing to smile but pushing the issue. He asked if Amazon fails to arrive, does she get that cash to utilize on different items, yes or no? She tried to argue the tax framework would differ if they came. He interrupted, asking for a yes or no. It was a simple inquiry. If the corporation does not construct their headquarters in the city, does the municipality possess $3 billion for education, or roads, or anything else? The pause extended. Everyone could perceive the representative was battling the query because she was comprehending, perhaps for the first time, that her grasp of the deal was basically incorrect. She finally whispered, "No." He repeated the word "no" with a voice that was still soft, but now contained a tone of instruction. He thought there was some misunderstanding regarding how tax incentives function. A tax break is not cash sitting in a savings account that one can elect to spend on a different item. It represents funds one agrees not to gather in years to come. If the business does not arrive, you do not get to gather those funds at all. You receive nothing. He asked if that was logical. The witness looked annoyed now. She insisted the issue was Amazon requesting corporate handouts while others suffered. He suggested they perform some basic arithmetic together. Kennedy cut her off and actually removed a pen and pad as if he intended to solve a simple math equation. Amazon claimed they would generate $27 billion in financial activity over time. The incentives were valued at $3 billion, so that is $27 billion subtracting $3 billion. He asked what the result was. She quietly said, $24 billion. He repeated the number while inscribing it on his page and displaying it like an instructor showing students. That is the amount the city would have acquired even after the deductions. But the company departed. So he asked how much the city receives now. He paused, waiting for her utterance. She confessed nothing. He said 0 while drawing a large cipher on his sheet. She transformed $24 billion into nothing. She turned 25,000 careers into nothing. All that tax income became nothing. And she did it because she believed tax cuts were cash sitting in a vault that could be used elsewhere. She obtained an economics diploma from Boston University. It is a very elite institution. It likely cost her family $60,000 annually. Yet they failed to teach her the distinction between tax incentives and state expenditure. The chamber was totally quiet, except for cameras capturing every second. The witness appeared to wish she were anywhere else. Kennedy's tone became even more soft, which somehow made the situation worse. He stated he was merely a humble attorney from the South, but even he understands that $24 billion is superior to 0. Those were actual occupations for actual households and actual revenue for schools and roads and actual financial movement. She drove it all away because she lacked understanding of fundamental economics. Those families who would have possessed those lucrative careers are not better off due to her choice. The city is not better off. But he supposed she felt satisfied about hurting Amazon. Perhaps that is what counts. He rearranged his documents. He suggested they proceed. She does not grasp that tax cuts are not expenses, and she turned billions into nothing, despite her degree. He looked at his notes as if recalling something. He mentioned one more item that had been troubling him. He heard her state once that joblessness is low because everyone holds two positions. He asked if he heard that correctly. She sighed. She claimed the remark was removed from its setting. She meant something else. He asked simply if she said it. He was not asking about the setting yet. He asked if she stated that unemployment is low because people possess two jobs. She said yes, but the argument she was making was different. He asked her to help him understand the calculation on that. Kennedy actually retrieved a computing device from his coat pocket, as if he were going to solve it. If he possesses two occupations, he asked how many times he is tallied in the labor statistics. She could perceive the direction of this query. She said once. He repeated that word. If the senator nearby holds two positions, he is counted once. If everyone in the chamber holds two positions, they are each counted once. So, possessing two careers does not make joblessness appear lower. That is not how the rate is computed. She tried to explain her wider point concerned salaries and living expenses. He understood she might have been attempting to make a wider point, but her declaration was explicitly regarding unemployment. She said the rate is low because people hold two jobs. That is mathematically impossible. If he works at the grocery market in the morning and drives a taxi at night, the Labor Bureau counts him as one working person with two roles, not two working people. Therefore, that cannot be the reason the rate is low. He asked if she saw his point. His tone was so enduring and soft, like explaining simple math to a youngster struggling with schoolwork. It made her mistake appear even more obvious. She admitted she spoke incorrectly. He nodded, saying everyone makes errors. That is a fair statement. However, she holds an economics diploma from Boston University. Her family spent $250,000 on that schooling. And she does not know how labor statistics are computed. That is not speaking incorrectly. That represents not knowing something essential to the field. That worries him because she is suggesting massive alterations to the economy. If she does not know how labor works, how can they trust her views on financial policy? The witness appeared irate now instead of ashamed. She stated it was obvious he was merely attempting to humiliate her rather than having a sincere discussion. He replied he was not trying to humiliate her. His voice remained frustratingly civil. He was merely posing simple inquiries. She made a claim about labor that was factually incorrect. That is not him humiliating her. That is him asking her to clarify a statement she uttered. If she cannot clarify it, that is not his error. He glanced at his documents, noting he still had a few minutes. He suggested they continue. She claimed unemployment was low due to multiple jobs, which is not how statistics function. Despite her degree, she lacks basics. He moved to the next subject without allowing her time to regain her poise. He asked if she supports universal government health care. She confirmed this, stating medical care is a human right. He agreed care is important, but he interrupted gently to discuss the finances of it, because that was their purpose today. Research estimates the plan would cost $32 trillion over a decade. That is over $3 trillion annually. He asked how we pay for that. She began reciting lines about taxing the rich and companies and savings from removing insurance fees, and how other nations provided care. He listened with that enduring look, then raised his hand. He asked to stop her there. He suggested they perform the math together if she did not object. He retrieved his paper and writing instrument again. All the billionaires in the nation combined possess roughly $4 trillion. That is their total fortune. If the government seized every cent they own, which can only happen once because then they have nothing, that is $4 trillion. However, the plan costs $32 trillion over 10 years, so that is $4 trillion applied to a $32 trillion bill. He asked where the remaining $27 trillion originates. She mentioned taxes on businesses and wealth levies on the rich. He interrupted again, but still softly. Even if they taxed every firm in the nation at 100% of their earnings, meaning they kept nothing, and if they taxed every individual earning over $100,000 a year at 100%, meaning they labored for free, we still could not fund this. The arithmetic does not function. He was not trying to be difficult. He was merely asking where the funds originate. He wanted a real answer, not prepared lines. She looked annoyed, stating other nations make it work like Canada and Europe. He counted points on his fingers, stating other nations do not have our population. They do not spend what we spend on military because we protect them. They possess different medical systems than what she is suggesting. Most significantly, he was not asking about other nations. He was asking about her plan for America. He asked where the $32 trillion comes from and asked her to display the math. The quiet that followed was awkward for everyone except the senator who sat there waiting for a response he knew would not arrive. She finally said the specifics would need to be resolved. He repeated the word specifics. The cost is not a detail. The price is essentially the most vital thing. She is proposing the largest growth of government in history and telling him the details of funding need to be resolved. That is like him going to a lender and asking for a mortgage to purchase a home. And when they ask how he plans to repay it, he says, those details need to be resolved. The lender would not grant him that mortgage. Why should the citizens give her $32 trillion without knowing how she will repay it? His time was nearly finished, but he pushed one final point. He noted a pattern. Regarding the environmental deal, she does not know the cost. Regarding health care, she does not know how to fund it. Regarding Amazon, she did not grasp basic tax policy. Regarding unemployment, she did not know how it is computed. And she possesses an economics diploma. She is in Congress creating financial policy. This worries him and should worry every citizen watching. She cannot explain how to fund her health plan. The math does not succeed. She merely wants to spend $32 trillion she does not possess. Kennedy looked at the timer. He had about 90 seconds remaining in his slot. He asked to inquire about her history very quickly. She has been in office for roughly 3 years now. He asked what significant bills she has successfully enacted into law. She appeared surprised by the shift in topic. She stated she introduced vital bills and shifted the national dialogue on issues. He stated he asked what she had passed. He meant bills that became statutes. He asked for her list of major achievements. She claimed the environmental deal fundamentally changed how we discuss climate. He interrupted, noting the deal received 0 votes in the Senate. When it came up for a tally, not a single member voted for it, including her party. In the House, her own leadership would not bring it to the floor because they knew it would fail. So that is not enacted legislation. That is a defeated suggestion. He asked what else. She tried to pivot to discussing changes she introduced and hearings she attended and raising awareness. He allowed her to speak for a moment, then interrupted again. He stated that raising awareness is what Internet personalities do. She is a member of the legislature. The legislature enacts statutes. That is the occupation. Write bills and get them through committees and pass them in the House. Hope the Senate passes them and the President signs them. That is lawmaking. He asked how many bills she has gotten through that procedure. The answer was clear from her silence. None. She had enacted nothing of importance. Kennedy stated 3 years in office and 0 major laws passed. But she has millions of online followers. He guessed that is something. However, the platform is not the same as governing. Posting is not the same as making laws, and being well known is not the same as being productive. He collected his documents as his time finished. He told the chairman he thought he was out of time, but appreciated the testimony. It had been very revealing. 3 years in office, with 0 major laws enacted. She is famous online, but useless legislatively. The chairman thanked him and moved to the next speaker, but Kennedy raised his hand. He asked if he could have just 30 more seconds to make a final point. The chairman agreed. Kennedy turned to look at the witness with an expression that was slightly less grandfatherly and slightly more stern, though still respectful. He wanted to thank her for her testimony. He meant that truthfully. She had been very exposing, just not in the way she likely intended. He paused to let that settle. She came to tell them about her environmental deal and why they should back it. But when he asked the cost, she could not tell him. When he asked about the Amazon choice, she showed she does not understand the difference between tax cuts and spending. When he asked about labor, she showed she does not know how it is calculated. When he asked about health care, she could not show the math. And when he asked about her legislative history, she could not name a single major achievement. His voice remained soft, but his words were ruinous. He thinks she is a gifted speaker. She is very good on social media. She knows how to get notice and get people eager. Those are actual talents, but they are not governing talents. They are promotional talents. He lifted his papers slowly without rushing. There is a large difference between sounding intelligent and being intelligent. There is a difference between talking about big concepts and knowing how to execute them. There is a difference between posting and lawmaking. Today, she showed them which side of those divides she is on. Kennedy stood up, keeping that polite Southern demeanor even while delivering a thorough destruction. He repeated he was just a humble lawyer from the South, but he knows this much. Before one proposes changing the whole economy, one should probably know the cost. Before one lectures people about finance, one should probably understand basic financial concepts. Before one tells other people to pay more taxes, one probably should not attend expensive parties wearing gowns that say "tax the rich." And before one asks citizens to trust one's judgment, one should probably pass some actual laws that show one knows what one is doing. He smiled one last time, but it was different now. It was less grandfather and more attorney who just won his suit. He hoped she would go back and do her homework. She should figure out what things actually cost. She needs to learn how policies work in reality, not just in theory. She should pass some legislation that aids actual people. Because right now, she is all talk and no weight. The public deserves better than service industry economics from someone with a fancy diploma who does not understand it. Kennedy nodded to the chair and yielded his time. The room exploded. Republicans were clapping loudly. Democrats looked awkward, many of them clearly agreeing with him, even if they could not say so openly. The witness sat at the table looking shocked and irate and ashamed all at once. She had come expecting to give inspiring words about her dream. Instead, an elderly senator with a regional accent had made her look totally unready, using nothing but simple queries delivered with constant politeness. And the entire event was recorded forever. It was permanently filed for anyone to view whenever they wanted to see what happens when internet fame meets actual knowledge. The clip did not just become popular on conservative sites where one would expect it. It went absolutely everywhere, crossing political lines in ways that content rarely achieves. Within 12 hours, the full 5 minutes had been viewed 38 million times across various platforms and news sites. By the second day, that number had burst to over 65 million. Within a week, over 100 million people had watched some version of the exchange. This made it one of the most viewed hearing clips in the history of the network. What made the video spread far beyond typical circles was the nature of the questioning. He had not engaged in personal insults. He had not raised his voice even once. He had not been rude in his tone. He simply asked basic, direct questions that any serious proposal should be able to answer. He asked what it costs, and how one pays for it, and how it works in practice. These were not trick questions designed to snare her with obscure facts. They were fundamental queries about execution that anyone proposing to transform the economy should have ready answers for. And despite her degree and her years in office, she could not answer them. That was not him being cruel. That was her being unready. Millions of viewers could see the difference clearly. The phrase regarding the simple lawyer became an instant cultural hit. Video creators made elaborate compilations showing him using that humble description before systematically destroying witnesses with his supposedly simple inquiries. The videos would show his educational credentials from Oxford and Virginia, next to footage of him playing the friendly grandfather. The contrast between his actual brilliance and his performed simplicity became a source of endless amusement. It was particularly popular among younger conservatives who never paid much attention to hearings before. One particularly viral video mixed his questioning of her with clips of him questioning other witnesses. They all followed the same pattern. He starts with the humble routine and asks seemingly simple questions, then watches the witness struggle while maintaining politeness, and ends with devastating summaries. The video titled "Senator Kennedy Being Fierce" got 43 million views. It introduced him to a new generation who thought hearings were dull. Conservative outlets played the exchange on an endless loop. They emphasized different aspects of his technique. Cable news ran segments with legal experts analyzing his style as a masterclass in cross-examination. They brought on law professors to explain how he used classic courtroom techniques to box her in. It made it impossible for her to escape without either answering or looking evasive. Sean Hannity dedicated an entire monologue to the exchange. He praised Kennedy for doing the job journalists should be doing. Radio hosts across the country played the audio multiple times. One famous host called it the most devastating testimony he had ever heard. He praised Kennedy for exposing the emptiness of the proposals. Local radio hosts used clips as intro music, making his voice familiar to millions of listeners. Mainstream outlets found themselves unable to ignore the story because the numbers were too massive. Some networks covered it extensively, though their analysis tried to be more sympathetic to the witness. Their segments featured commentators who argued that Kennedy had been condescending. They claimed his routine was a kind of disrespect. Some analysts suggested that demanding specific figures was a bad faith tactic designed to make ambitious proposals look irresponsible. These defenses mostly failed because anyone could watch the actual video. They could see he was unfailingly polite. His tone never became mocking. He never called her names. The fact that she could not provide answers was not his fault. Even those sympathetic to her policies could see that distinction. Coverage on other networks was more divided. Some defended her, but others acknowledged her performance was problematic. One analyst admitted she walked into a trap she built herself by not doing homework. Another said privately that many Democrats were frustrated with her for making the party look unready. The exchange had immediate policy impacts beyond just damaging her brand. The environmental deal became completely toxic politically after the questioning. Democrats running in competitive races wanted nothing to do with it. When asked about climate policy, they would talk in general terms. They studiously avoided mentioning her specific proposal by name. The fact that its most prominent advocate could not answer basic questions made association with it dangerous. Campaign strategists began advising candidates to distance themselves from her proposals. Internal polling showed her brand had become a liability. Voters in swing districts found the questions compelling and her inability to answer them troubling. They wanted action, but they also wanted to know it was feasible. Kennedy had raised reasonable doubts. Healthcare proposals also suffered collateral damage. The simple question about how to pay for $32 trillion resonated with voters. Candidates campaigning on the issue found themselves facing more skeptical questions. The days of advocating for it purely on moral grounds were over. Kennedy had made the details matter. The Amazon example became particularly damaging to her credibility on economic issues. Kennedy explained the difference between tax cuts and spending in terms anyone could understand. The fact that she did not understand that difference despite her degree made her look either ignorant or dishonest. Either interpretation was politically damaging. Defenders of the deal felt vindicated. They had been saying that killing the deal would cost the city jobs. Kennedy made that argument in stark terms. Local news revisited the story, interviewing experts who explained what was lost. Perhaps most significantly, her entire political brand took a major hit. She had built her persona on being the smart progressive who would shake up the establishment. The degree was part of that brand. The quick wit was part of that brand. Kennedy's 5 minutes had shattered that image. He exposed that maybe she was not well informed on details. Maybe she was better at generating engagement than governing. Maybe the degree was just a credential. Maybe the confidence was masking a lack of preparation. For weeks afterward, any time she gave a speech, someone would ask her to clarify costs. She clearly hated it. She had gotten it and used to speaking in broad terms without defending details. Kennedy had made details matter again. He showed that passion is not a substitute for knowledge. Kennedy himself became a viral sensation. Young conservatives started sharing his techniques as models. Just ask them what it costs became a standard response. Slogans about showing the math started appearing on merchandise. His office was flooded with requests for him to question other politicians. He leaned into it. In subsequent hearings, he would make a point of asking similar questions. The routine became his brand. It was effective because he proved it worked. He could make smart people look foolish without being rude. 6 months later, her polling numbers showed the damage. Her ratings had dropped among independents. Moderate party members increasingly saw her as a liability. The video became standard opposition research material. More importantly, she seemed genuinely rattled by the experience. She became notably more cautious about making specific claims. She relied more heavily on prepared statements. When doing interviews, she would steer away from detailed discussions. The swagger that marked her early years was tempered by a recognition that she had been exposed. The ultimate irony was that his performance was not particularly complex. He hadn't used some sophisticated technique. He just asked simple questions and insisted on answers. Any competent questioner could do the same if they prepared. That is what made the exchange so damaging. It was that answering his questions should have been ordinary. The fact that she could not do it revealed a lack of preparation. This was a Rhodes Scholar, disguised as a country lawyer exposing a bartender. This was preparation meeting popularity. John Kennedy had spent hours going through her statements. He prepared simple questions that any policymaker should be able to answer. He practiced his delivery, perfecting that folksy routine. She had prepared talking points and passion. She assumed her fame would carry her through. She was wrong. The exchange proved something important about communication in the social media age. Followers can make you famous. Viral videos can make you influential. But none of that is a substitute for knowing what you are talking about. None of that prepares you to answer simple questions. Kennedy showed that you do not need to yell to expose a lack of preparation. You just need to ask simple questions and refuse to accept non-answers. He asked what it costs and how you pay for it. Simple questions reveal whether someone has thought through their proposals. She couldn't explain costs because she never calculated them. She couldn't defend the Amazon decision because she never understood the economics. She couldn't explain unemployment because she made claims without checking. She couldn't show how to pay for health care because she assumed passion was enough. And she couldn't point to accomplishments because she spent her time online. Kennedy exposed all of that with clarity, and he did it while being unfailingly polite. He maintained his persona right up until the end. If you think policies should have answers to basic questions, share this story. If you believe a degree should mean you understand the subject, share this story. If you think online followers are not the same as competence, share this story. Because Senator Kennedy proved that simple questions can expose everything when the person has not done their homework. And sometimes, the smartest thing you can do is play dumb and let someone expose themselves.